Alright, what's up everybody? Back with another edition of Everyday Hoops. Hope you guys are having a good one. Today is part 2 of yesterday's Indiana Pacers video, remembering when they were the next team up back in 2012-13 season. Today, we're going to talk about the 2013-2014 season for the Pacers. It was a very exciting season and a lot happened. Thank you guys for watching yesterday's video. And thank you guys for watching, the content around here, the videos, the shorts, all that stuff. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed the content around here, consider subscribing, like, turn notifications, do all stuff like that. I'd really appreciate it. It really helps out a lot. Look at the analytics, a little bit less than 1% of you that watch the videos are subscribed. So, if you like the content, hit the subscribe button. I really appreciate it a whole lot. And yeah, I don't want to waste any more of your time. Let's get right into it. So we left off at the end of the 2012-2013 season. The Indiana Pacers were eliminated by the Miami Heat, or became the eventual champions in the conference finals in 7 games. A very tough way to end the season, but the Pacers still had a lot going on for them. I mean, they had Paul George just had a breakout season and expected to keep getting better. You saw guys like David West, George Hill, and Roy Hibbert all there, and the Pacers still were looked at as a nice young up-and-coming team. Going into the offseason, the NBA draft with their 23rd overall pick, they drafted forward Solomon Hill out of Arizona, an athletic two-way wing that could shoot the three, also defend really well. And yeah, it was an exciting pick for the Pacers. Then going to free agency, they signed Donald Sloan, backup point guard, to a 2-year, $1.8 million deal. Sloan just came off a season where he played in 20 games with the Cavaliers, averaging 4 points, and also playing 3 games with the New Orleans Hornets. He was still only just 25 years old, and was around the league for the first 2 years of his career, just really trying to find a home as an undrafted point guard out of Texas A&M. They also signed C.J. Watson to a 2-year, $4 million deal. Watson, a veteran, another backup point guard, was around the league. In 2013, he was with the Brooklyn Nets, where he averaged 6.8 points and 2 assists per game. He was coming to Indiana on a 2-year deal, trying to get in the consistency at the backup point guard position. They also signed Chris Copeland to a 2-year, $6.1 million deal. Copeland was another undrafted player that made a big mark last season with the New York Knicks. His rookie year at 28, coming in, averaging 8 points and 2 rebounds on 48% shooting and 42% from 3, a solid 3-and-D wing. And their biggest move of the offseason, re-signing David West to a 3-year, $36.6 million deal. West was kind of a staple over there in Indiana, gave him some veteran leadership, also just being a really good forward that could score the ball, rebound, defend, do all of that. And their last move of free agency was a little bit of a big one, trading away Jalen Green, Miles Plumlee, who they just drafted in last year's first round, and a 2014 first round pick to the Phoenix Suns for forward Luis Scola. Scola was coming off a year where he played all 82 games with Phoenix with the Suns. He averaged 12 points and 6 rebounds per game. Formerly of the Houston Rockets. He was 32 years old, but still could definitely give the game a lot, and was going to be moving to a backup spot over in Indiana, kind of come off the bench because they still had David West and Roy Hibbert. So Luis Scola is going to become kind of their 6-man scorer off the bench. They also lost a few guys. They lost DJ Augustine, who was the original backup point guard, to the Toronto Raptors, and also lost Tyler Hanswell to the Raptors as well. Both guys that came off the bench and did some very solid things in 2013 with the Pacers, but now they're both going over to Toronto looking for a bigger role. Coming into the opening night roster, it was a little different. The bench was a little different, of course, adding guys like Sloan, Watson, Copeland. Rasul Butler came over to the team as well at 34 years old, but they still had the core of it together. Paul George now turning 23, Roy Hibbert, David West, George Hill, Lance Stevenson 1 year better, Frank Vogel still being the head coach. They still had a 30-year-old Danny Granger on the bench as well, with Ian Mahimi, Orlando Johnson. They still had a very solid team, and coming into the season, the Indiana Pacers were expected to have a 56-26 record, which would be one of the best they've had in the history of their team. So big expectations were put on this young Pacers team, and we're going to see how they handled it. Their first game of the season, they played against the Orlando Magic, which they beat them 97-87. They outscored them 29-20 in the third quarter. Paul George finished with 24-6-5. Lance Stevenson had 19-7-5, and David West had 13. A very solid way to open the season, and they took that and ran with it as they started the 2014 season 9-0, beating up on teams. They beat the Pelicans 95-90 as they outscored New Orleans 59-40 in the second half. They beat the Cavaliers 89-74. Beat the Pistons 99-91 as they outscored Detroit 36-22 in the third, and Paul George put up 31-10. They beat the Bulls 97-80 as they outscored Chicago 34-18 in the fourth. Beat the Raptors 91-84. Beat the Nets 96-91. Beat the Grizzlies 95-79 as 6 players scored in double figures. And they beat the Bucks 104-77 as they outscored Milwaukee 52-37 in the first half. What a way to start the season. High expectations for this Pacers team this season, and they came out firing, starting 9-0, everything clicking. Paul George looking like he took another step. Guys like Lance Stevenson, Roy Hibbert, David West really taking over for this team as well, and the defense obviously being there. Their first loss came to the Chicago Bulls. They lost 110-94, but after that loss, they then went on another big winning streak of 7 games to enter December 2nd with a 16-1 record. What a start to the season. 16-1. Expected to win 56 games. It looked like they're on pace to do it. They look like they're on pace to have a record-breaking season potentially in Indiana. But then they started to come back down to earth, as from December 2nd to December 18th, they went 4-4, losing to the Blazers 106-102 as LaMarcus Aldridge and Damian Lillard put up 54, even though Paul George put up 40. They lost to the Thunder 118-94 as Westbrook and Durant combined for 62. They lost to the Pistons 101-96 as Josh Smith put in 30, and lost to the Heat 97-94 as the Big Three of Miami combined for 71. Their record was now 20-5, still first in the Eastern Conference, but now things started to come back down to earth. But then they went on a good 5-game win streak to end December. They beat the Rockets 114-81 as 6 players scored in double figures. They beat the Celtics 106-79. Beat the Nets 103-86 as Lance and Paul George put in 52 combined. They beat the Nets 105-91 as their starters scored 89 points. And they beat the Cavs 91-76. They outscored Cleveland 26-10 in the fourth to bring their record up to 25-5 entering the new year of 2014. Still an amazing record. They started January with a 3-2 record, beating the Pelicans, Cavs, and Raptors, but also losing a game to the Raptors and the Hawks. But then after that, they went on another 5-game win streak, beating the Wizards 93-66, beating the Kings 116-92 as Paul George put in 31. They beat the Knicks 117-89 as Lance and Paul George combined for 53. They beat the Clippers 106-92 as Paul George put in 36, and beat the Warriors 102-94, outscoring them 35-21 in the first quarter and continuing that for the rest of the game, as now they had a 33-7 record, the best in the NBA. The Pacers was coming, man. They were opening eyes across the world. Everyone was noticing Paul George taking another leap. They noticed how great their defense is, noticing just how really good this Indiana Pacers team was. And of course, the expectations kept growing. As time went on, they kept going on these 5-game, 7-game win streaks. Expectations were growing that maybe they could be the team to take out that monster at the top. They ended January 2-3, beating the Kings and Lakers, but losing to the Suns twice and the Nuggets to get to 35-10 entering February. But then they started February winning 4 straight games, beating the Nets again 97-96. Their starters scored 81 points combined. They beat the Magic 98-79, beat the Hawks 89-85, and beat the Blazers 118-113 in overtime as George Hill put in 37 and David West put up 30. At this point, it was getting close to the trade deadline and to the All-Star break. And at this point, the Indiana Pacers decided to go in for it and make a big move. Maybe not big in terms of stats and getting rid of a guy that was going crazy that season and getting in 2 guys that were super amazing. But it was a trade that the Pacers felt like they had to make, as they made a trade to send their longtime forward Danny Granger and a 2015 second-round pick to the Philadelphia 76ers for LaVoy Allen and Evan Turner. This wasn't a big move statistically, but it was a big move kind of emotionally for the Pacers. I mean, they drafted him 17th overall in 2005, and Granger became an all-star in 2009 where he averaged 25 points per game. He was there through the thick of it. Through after the Reggie Miller era where things were changing in Indiana, Danny Granger was there. Danny Granger had a great career in Indiana until 2013. Last season, he only played 5 games at 29 years old. Injuries started to come up. And throughout the 2014 season, he was kind of losing his spot, losing minutes. He only played in 29 games at that point in 2014, averaging just 8 points on 36% shooting. So they then traded him to the Philadelphia 76ers for two guys that were doing really solid that year. Evan Turner and Lavoy Allen were still both young guys that can contribute to the team. Lavoy Allen being a 4 that could rebound, will also score inside offensively. And Evan Turner being a guy that can defend multiple positions, also play multiple positions, be a point guard, be a 2 guard, even be the 3 at some points. So there are two guys that the Pacers definitely could use in right ways. Unfortunately, they had to send out longtime guy Danny Granger, who of course was just a staple on the Pacers the last few years. But you got to do what you have to do to win. And the Pacers decided that that was the move to make. They then went 1-2 in their last 3 games before All-Star break as they headed into the break with a 40-12 record. First in the East and second in the NBA, only behind the Oklahoma City Thunder, who are 43-12 at that point. For the Pacers, they definitely had representatives at the All-Star game as Paul George made his second straight All-Star appearance, while also big man Roy Hibbert made his first NBA All-Star appearance. Of course, the best team in the East, you got to have 2 All-Stars. And Frank Vogel capped it off, coaching the Eastern Conference in the All-Star game. Paul George also was in the dunk contest that season. And yeah, again, people are noticing the Indiana Pacers, man. I mean, 2 guys selected to the All-Star game. The coach selected to the All-Star game. I mean, it was, big expectations were on the Pacers coming into the season. And even throughout the season, they looked like they were going to be even better than what we thought they were going to be. I mean, dominating teams on both ends. Defensively, of course, locking up, being one of the best defensive teams in the league. And on offense, guys like Paul George taking big steps. Lance Stevenson was taking a big step. David West was just being solid. Guys like George Hill, Chris Copeland, CJ Watson coming off the bench and providing good minutes. I mean, this Pacers team looked like they could do something in the playoffs, but they still need to finish the regular season out. Coming out of the All-Star break, they won 6 of their first 7 games. And on March 3rd, they had a 46-13 record, back to the best in the NBA. But the Miami Heat were trailing right behind them at 43-14. Then, after winning 6 of their first 7 coming out of All-Star break, they went on a season-long 4-game losing streak. Losing to the Warriors 98-96 as Klay Thompson hit a game-winning jumper. They lost to the Bobcats at 109-87 as they got outscored 28-8 in the first quarter and couldn't make it up. They lost to the Rockets 112-86 as they got outscored 38-16 in the third quarter, and lost to the Mavericks 105-94 as 6 Maverick players scored in double figures, dropping the Pacers record down to 46-17. Still first in the East, but now tied for the best in the NBA with the Oklahoma City Thunder. They then won 4 straight games after that 4-game losing streak, of course, making it back up. Beating the Celtics 94-83, the 76ers 101-94, the Pistons 112-104 in overtime, and the Sixers again 99-90 to get to 50-17. Then they ended March not on a great note, ending March 2-6 and entering April with a 52-23 record, tied for first in the East with the Miami Heat. The first time in a very long time they did not have possession of the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. The Pacers really need to get it going now. If they wanted that number 1 seed and that advantage, especially because they kind of already knew that the Miami Heat, they were probably going to have to go through them in the playoffs, and having home court advantage in that series is going to be crucial. So the Pacers needed to come into April and win games, but unfortunately they didn't do that well. They started April 1-2, beating the Pistons, but then losing to the Raptors and Hawks, falling down to second in the East at 52-25, a half game behind Miami. But then at the end of the season, they locked in and won 3 of their last 4 games to finish with a 56-26 record and getting that number 1 spot in the East. It was their first 50-win season and their best record since 2004 when they went 61-21. A lot of players took big steps that season. Paul George came in after his first All-Star appearance, making his second one and being even better, averaging over 21.5 points with 6 rebounds, 3.5 assists, and almost 2 steals. For the second straight year, made All-NBA third team and also made All-Defensive first team. David West averaged 14-6, shooting 48% from the field. Lance Stevenson took a big jump as well in 2014, averaging just under 14 points with 7 rebounds and over 4.5 assists as he finished second in most improved player voting, only losing to Goran Dragic. Roy Hibbert had a great year as well, making his first All-Star appearance, also averaging over 10 points, 6 rebounds, and 2 blocks per game as he finished second in Defensive Player of the Year voting behind Joakim Noah, and he made All-Defensive second team. And George Hill also was very solid as their starting point guard, averaging 10 points, 3 rebounds, and 3.5 assists. At the end of the season, their offense actually dropped to what it was in 2013. In 2013, they were the 20th ranked offense. In 2014, they finished as the 23rd ranked offense. But it didn't matter because for the second straight year, they finished with the best defense in the NBA with a 99.3 defensive rating. This Pacers team had a lot of expectations, like I kept saying, but the Pacers at this point, number 1 in the Eastern Conference, home court advantage throughout the East. I mean, after being 1 game away from the NBA Finals last season, people expected something very similar, and maybe for the Pacers to get to the Finals and finally beat that behemoth in the Eastern Conference. But of course, they had to get there first. In the NBA playoffs, at the number 1 seed, they played the 8 seed to the first round. For the second straight year, they would play the Atlanta Hawks. The Hawks finished with a 38-44 record, but still making the Eastern Conference because, yeah, that was the East at that point. Atlanta was making big moves in that offseason, bringing in Paul Millsap, who made an all-star team in his first year in Atlanta. They also brought in sharpshooter Kyle Korver. So this Atlanta Hawks team was a little bit revamped, different from last year. But, I mean, 38-44 against the Pacers. People thought, all right, Indiana should just get them out the way quick. But it did not happen that easily. In game 1, I don't know what it was. Maybe it was just the Pacers playing down the competition, or the Hawks coming out with a lot of energy, or maybe a combination of both. It was a tie game at halftime in game 1, but then the third quarter, Atlanta outscored Indiana 30-16, and Atlanta would shock Indiana, taking game 1, 101-93. Paul George had a good game, putting in 24, 10, and 5 with 4 steals and 2 blocks, and Lance put in 19. But the Hawks were too much, came out with a lot of energy on both ends, and took game 1 in Indiana, taking a 1-0 series lead. Kind of putting a little bit of a spark into Indiana, like, hey, I know we're bad, we're 38-44, the 8th seed, but we're not just going to let you guys win this game. Coming into game 2, it was a very similar script to game 1. Atlanta led by 4 at the half, but then the third quarter, Indiana outscored Atlanta 31-13 in the third quarter, as they shot 53% from the field. That held Atlanta to 39% shooting from the field, as the Pacers would win game 2, 101-85. George had another good game, putting in 27, 10, and 6 with 4 steals, while Luis Scola put in 20 off the bench and George Hill put in 15, as they would tie the series at 1 now, going back to Atlanta. But Atlanta did their job. I mean, taking 1 game on the road as an 8 seed is very huge, but people thought, all right, now here come the Indiana Pacers. They're not going to mess around and lose again, right? Well, a very similar story. First half was very close, but then the second half, Atlanta outscored Indiana 55-47. Indiana shot just 37% from the field, and Atlanta hit 12 3-pointers as the Hawks would take game 3 at home, 98-85. Lance Stevenson put in 21 and 13, and Luis Scola had 17 off the bench, but it wasn't enough as the starters kind of struggled for Indiana, and the Hawks would take game 3 and lead 2-1. Game 4 in Atlanta was, a must-win for Indiana. If the Hawks would have won game 4 at home, up 3-1 on the number 1 seed in the East, oh man, I don't even want to know what was going to be said about the Pacers. Game 4, though, was very, very close. It was a very close game throughout the first 3 quarters. In the fourth quarter, with 8 seconds left, Paul George missed 2 free throws that would have sealed the game. The Hawks got a chance to tie it, but Pero Antic missed the 3 at the buzzer. Atlanta shot just 37% from the field, and the Pacers would win game 4, 91-88. George put up 24, 10, and 5, and David West put in 18, and they would tie the series at 2 now, going back to Indiana. It was very back and forth. Back and forth. Atlanta will win, Pacers win, Atlanta win, Pacers win. Game 5 back at home in Indiana. No way the Pacers are going to do it again. No way the Pacers are going to miss out on an opportunity to lead the series and put this 38-44 team away, right? Well, in the second quarter, Atlanta outscored Indiana 41-19, and Atlanta would hit 15 3-pointers as the Hawks would take Game 5 in Indiana 107-97. Paul George put in 26, 12, and 6, but it wasn't enough as Atlanta was just on fire from 3, and they would take a 3-2 series lead in Indiana. A big thing with the Pacers that was going wrong for them was their all-star. Not the Paul George, but their other one, Roy Hibbert. Roy Hibbert only played 12 minutes of Game 5 and did not score, and was having a very bad, to say the least, series throughout the first few games. He kind of went invisible at this point. Going into Game 6 in Atlanta, it was all hands on deck. The Pacers, a 56-win team, were down 3-2 with a chance to lose on the road to a 38-win team in the Atlanta Hawks. So the Pacers, they needed everything they could in this game, and they kind of got it. Going into the fourth quarter, Indiana outscored Atlanta 31-21 in that quarter, as the Hawks would shoot just 35% from the field. The Pacers locked in defensively, and their veteran leadership helped the Pacers win this game 6, 95-88, as David West had a really good game, putting in 24, 11, and 6. Paul George also put up 24, and Lance had 21 and 9, and they would go to a Game 7 in Indiana. 1-8 matchup in the Game 7, man. When's the last time we've seen that, huh? In Game 7, I mean, with the pattern that we're looking like, it looked like Indiana was on the ropes. It looked like Atlanta could have won this Game 7. I mean, just looking at the pattern, Atlanta would take one, Pacers win. Pacers never had a series lead in this one, but it was back at Indiana, right? No way the Pacers are going to lose 3 games at home in a series, and they didn't. Atlanta had a very bad shooting Game 7, shooting just 30% from the field, and the Pacers, led by Paul George, would win Game 7 92-80. George had a great Game 7, putting in 30 and 11, while Lance put in 19, 14, and 5, and George Hill put up 15, as the Pacers would escape the 1-8 matchup, winning in 7, and going on to the second round for another year in a row. A series that, again, very too close to comfort, especially for a team that was 38 and 44. You got to give a lot of credit to the Atlanta Hawks for bringing the 56-win team Pacers to literally to a Game 7. As an A seed, bringing a number 1 seed to a Game 7, you don't see that often, so you got to give a lot of credit to the Atlanta Hawks, but the Pacers fought back and eventually ended up winning that series. George had a really good first round series, averaging just under 24 points per game, with over 10.5 rebounds, 4 assists, and almost 2.5 steals. Lance put up 15, 9, and 3 assists. David West averaged 13, 7, and 5 with a steal and over 1.5 blocks. George Hill put in 13 with 4 assists as the Pacers would escape and move on to the second round. Their conference semifinals matchup was against the number 5 seed Washington Wizards. The Wizards were a very surprised team in the league this year. After missing the playoffs for 5 years in a row, John Wall took them to the next level, making an all-star team, averaging 19 and 8 assists, while also young guys like Bradley Beal, Trevor Ariza, Marcin Gortat, and Nene really helped this team out, and the Pacers would finish 44 and 38, making their first playoff appearance in 5 years, finishing as a 5 seed as they knocked out the Chicago Bulls in 5 in the first round. Going into Game 1 in Indiana, it was a very close game throughout the entirety of it, very, very close, but Washington would win the small things that matter. They won the rebounding battle and the assist battle, as the Wizards would take Game 1 in Indiana, 102-96. Here we go again. The second straight series, the 56-win Pacers would lose Game 1 at home. 5 players scored in double figures for Indiana, but it wasn't enough, as the Wizards, led by John Wall, Bradley Beal, would take Game 1 and take a 1-0 series lead. And Roy Hibbert, once again, a very bad game. He played 17 minutes in Game 1, did not score, and did not grab a rebound in Game 1. And a lot of pressure was being put on Roy Hibbert. I mean, he was an all-star this year, finished second in Defensive Player of the Year voting, had a big season, and so far, throughout 8 games in the playoffs, has done nothing. Has been vanishing, hasn't been playing over like 30-something minutes, just because he has not been able to do everything. And I guess, finally, Roy Hibbert realized this, and it lit a spark in him for Game 2. In Game 2, Roy Hibbert was big in this game, grabbing rebounds, blocking shots, scoring down low, and being the Roy Hibbert we know he was. The Wizards also missed multiple 3-pointers late in this game that would have given them the lead, as the Pacers escaped with a Game 2 win, 86-82, as Roy Hibbert put up 28 points and 9 rebounds, finally showing himself in this playoffs, as they would tie the series at 1, going into Washington. Now, looking at history and looking at the first round series, it was not going to be a crazy thing to say that Washington probably could take one of these games at home and maybe even take Game 3. Going into Game 3 is very close throughout the first half, but in the third quarter, Indiana outscored Washington 26-12, as Washington shot just 33% from the field, and the Pacers forced 17 turnovers, as Indiana would easily win Game 3, 85-63. Paul George put up 23 and Roy Hibbert put up 14, as the Pacers would take a 2-1 series lead. Going to Game 4 in Washington, it looked like the Wizards were going to tie the series. The Wizards outscored Indiana 29-11 in the second quarter and took a big first half lead. But then in the third quarter, Indiana would flip the script as they outscored Washington 33-17 in the third quarter. The Wizards had a lot of misses and a lot of turnovers forced by the Indiana Pacers late in this game, and George Hill had a couple free throws to seal this game, as the Pacers would win Game 4 95-92. Paul George had an amazing game, putting in 39 points and 12 rebounds, and Roy Hibbert had 17, and Indiana would take a 3-1 series lead back home to Indiana for Game 5. And it looked like, alright, the Pacers up 3-1, going back home for Game 5. let's just end this series now because we know who's coming up in the conference final. But unfortunately, it didn't work like that. In Game 5, the Wizards gave it everything they had, outscoring Indiana 31-14 in the third quarter and shooting 50% from the field, while holding Indiana to just 39% shooting from the field as the Wizards blew out Indiana 102-79 in Game 5 and forced a Game 6 back in Washington. This was big. I mean, Pacers could have just won in 5 and moved on to the next round, but instead the Wizards came out with everything they had. Shout out to the Wizards for doing that. But now we go back to Washington for a Game 6. In Game 6, Indiana was not messing around anymore. Led by David West once again in a Game 6, Indiana shoot 51% from the field and held Washington just 39% shooting from the field and 11% shooting from 3, as Indiana would win Game 6 93-80. As David West put up 29, Lance Stevenson at 17 and 8, and Indiana would win Game 6. They'll win the series and move on to the conference finals for the second straight year. In that series, Paul George once again had a good one, averaging over 19.5 points with 6 rebounds, 2 assists, and over 2 steals. David West averaged 16 and 6. Roy Hibbert finally came to play, averaging 12 points and 2 blocks. George Hill averaged 11, 3 and 3, 1.5 steals, and Lance Stevenson averaged 11, 5, and almost 5 assists. And now we got another conference finals date with the number 2 seed in the Eastern Conference, the Miami Heat. For the third straight year, Indiana and Miami will meet up in the playoffs. So Miami taking the first 2. And now, this was Indiana's get back. Finally, Indiana, this could possibly be the year that a lot of people thought Indiana could do it. Indiana could be the team to take out this monster at the top of the East, the 2-time reigning champions, guys that have been in the NBA Finals for 3 straight years, the team that a lot of people wanted to see lose. LeBron, D-Wade, Bosh, and the Heat. This could finally be the year. And it looked like it could be in Game 1. In Game 1, Indiana was amazing defensively, holding Miami to just 6 for 23 shooting from 3. And the Pacers also shot 37 free throws as Indiana would take Game 1, 107-96 at home. Paul George put up 24 and 6 players scored in double figures as Indiana finally took a Game 1 at home. Also, home court advantage, huge in this series as well. Going to Game 2, Miami came back. Dwayne Wade hit a bunch of clutch shots late in this game. Miami also shot 50% from the field as the Heat would sneak out with a Game 2 win, 87-83. Lance put up 25, 6, and 7, but Paul George had a very tough game, shooting just 4 for 16 from the field, and Miami would tie the series at 1, going back to South Beach. This 2 games are huge. Going into Miami, Indiana actually was very solid on the road so far throughout the first 2 rounds, but of course in Miami, it was going to be very, very tough to win. Going to Game 3 is a very close first half, but then Miami outscored Indiana 61-43 in the second half. Miami shot 54% from the field and hit 10 3-pointers as Heat would win Game 3 99-87 and take a 2-1 series lead. Game 4, Pacers needed this one. Game 4 in Miami, giving Miami a 3-1 series advantage was just something they did not want to do, did not want to see. So Indiana needed to come out and take this game 4. Miami outscored Indiana 31-20 in the third quarter after a close first half. Miami shot 34 free throws and forced 17 turnovers. The Pacers just were not on their game, and the Heat took Game 4 102-90. Paul George put up 23, David West had 20 and 12, but Roy Hibbert once again disappeared, not scoring in Game 4 as Miami would now take a 3-1 series lead. It looked like this was over. I mean, the Pacers, this was probably their best chance to take them out, and now they were down 3-1. But fortunately for them, they still had home court advantage. Still had 2 of the next 3 games if they could make it at home. And in Game 5, it was all hands on deck. Miami led 42-33 at the half, and it looked like Miami was going to take this in 5. But in the third quarter, Indiana outscored Miami 31-15, setting up a good fourth quarter. With 14 seconds left, David West missed 1 out of 2 free throws that could have potentially sealed the game. And their last possession, Chris Bosh missed a huge 3-pointer to send it overtime as Indiana would escape with a Game 5 win 93-90. Paul George did everything he could in this game, finishing with 37 points and 6 rebounds with 6 steals, having a phenomenal game, while David West also chipped in 19-9, and they would force a Game 6 back in Miami. Again, the Pacers needed the same energy that came out in Game 5 with. They needed defense, they needed Paul George to be Paul George, they needed everybody to show up and they needed to force a Game 7 back at home, because back at home the advantage would be with them. In Game 6, though, Miami took it to them. They outscored Indiana 67-45 in the second and third quarter combined. The Heat would shoot 58% from the field and easily beat Indiana 117-92 at home and advance to their fourth straight NBA Finals. Paul George put up 29-8 in Game 6, but it just was not enough. Miami would take Game 6 and eliminate the Indiana Pacers from the playoffs for the third straight year. Paul George had a really good conference final series, averaging 24 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists with just under 2 steals. David West averaged 16, 7, and 3. Lance Stevenson averaged 14, 5, and 5. George Hill averaged 11.5 points with 4 rebounds. Roy Hibbert averaged 10 points and 7 rebounds. But that was it. I mean, the Pacers did everything they could, winning 56 games, taking the home court advantage, winning Game 1, but it just was not enough as the Heat, LeBron, Wade, and Bosh, they just could not get over the hump, as the Heat would go on to the NBA Finals and eventually lose to the San Antonio Spurs in 5 games. Now, it was expected that the Pacers were going to come out and keep this going. I mean, they still had Paul George in contract, still had guys like David West, Roy Hibbert, Luis Scola. Like, people didn't expect it to be over at this point. People expect the Pacers to come out and have a similar year next year. But unfortunately, things didn't work like that. As in the summer of 2014, playing for the Olympic team, Paul George suffered a horrific leg injury that forced him to miss all but just 6 games in 2015. And also their young, up-and-coming guy, Lance Stevenson, will leave the Pacers to chase a bag and go to the Charlotte Hornets. And also their guys like Roy Hibbert and David West just did not have the same impact they did in 2015. George Hill only played in 43 games next season, and the Pacers would finish 38-44 in 2015 and miss the playoffs. And at that point, it was kind of over. This young Indiana Pacers team that was supposed to be the next team up, supposed to be the team to beat the Heat, supposed to be the future of the Eastern Conference, all of that was down the drain. And it was just a very sad way to end this Indiana Pacers team that should have been the next ones up. But yeah, that's it for today. Hope you guys enjoyed. Once again, if you enjoyed the content, consider subscribing, like, turn notifications, all stuff like that. I really love making this video. I've done a few other ones I did. One about the 2019 Kings that should have made the playoffs. They should have broken the playoff drought that year. Go watch that. And I also made one about the Oklahoma City Thunder's Big 3 in 2018 with Westbrook, George, and Carmelo Anthony. That failed. Go watch that. And if you have any other suggestions for teams that should do like this, like remember these teams, or maybe even players, type 1, let me know in the comments. Teams like this, though, not teams that won championships or did anything historic. Teams like this Pacer team that maybe could be forgotten about, in the next few years. Teams that potentially could have been forgotten about that, were actually really good, or actually really fun. So, yeah, let me know if you have any teams like that you want to see me talk about. And, yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow.